The courtroom was loud just moments ago, lawyers talking, papers shuffling, people whispering. Then the judge leaned forward and asked the single father one simple question. It wasn't he aggressive, it wasn't he complicated. But the moment the words left the judge's mouth, everything changed. The room fell completely silent, even the mother asked. Laura stopped writing. No one expected this question, and no one was prepared for the answer. What the father said next would decide not just custody but the future of a child caught between two very different worlds. Custody battles are some of the most painful legal fights any parent can face. Behind every case file is a child, a parent trying to hold on, in a system that must decide what is truly best. Single fathers, in particular, often walk into court feeling invisible, already judged before they speak. The story matters because it challenges assumptions, exposes how family courts really work, and shows how one honest moment can outweigh years of accusations. If you've ever wondered how judges see through legal noise to find the truth, this case explains it clearly. The single father did not look like someone preparing to fight. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't whispering urgently to his lawyer. He sat quietly on the wooden bench, hands folded, eyes focused somewhere between the judge's desk and the floor. To the people watching, he might have appeared detached. In reality, he had already fought this battle every day for years, long before it reached the courtroom. 3 years earlier, his life had collapsed quietly, without drama. The separation wasn't explosive. There were no police calls, no public arguments, and no viral moments. It ended the way many marriages do, slowly, painfully, and with exhaustion on both sides. But when the mother left, she didn't take the child. She said she needed time to get stable. Time turned into weeks, weeks into months, and eventually into years. The father didn't announce his sacrifice. He simply adjusted. He learned how to braid hair by watching videos late at night. He memorized school schedules, pediatric appointments, in which nights the nightmares were worse. He learned the difference between I am hungry and I am scared, between silence and exhaustion. There was no applause for this version of masculinity, only responsibility. When the custody papers arrived years later, they didn't mention any of that. Instead, the documents listed numbers, dates, and claimed income comparisons, missed school events, medical leave records from when he collapsed from stress and overwork. The mother asked. Laura painted a picture of instability, financial strain, emotional burnout, limited support systems. On paper, it looked persuasive. To a court trained to prioritize structure and predictability, the narrative made sense. What the paperwork didn't show was context. The missed school events happened during overnight shifts he worked to keep the lights on. The medical leave followed months of sleep deprivation while caring for a sick child alone. The financial strain came from choosing school supplies over legal counsel, groceries over therapy. None of that fit neatly into legal bullet points. The mother's return was sudden and strategic. By then, she had a stable job, a new apartment, and legal representation. From the outside, it looked like a redemption story, someone who had rebuilt and was ready to reclaim motherhood. Courts value stability, and her lawyer emphasized this relentlessly. The father did not interrupt. He had been warned by his attorney not to react emotionally. Family court, he was told, was not a place for speeches or displays. It was a place for consistency, documentation, and restraint. So he listened as his life was summarized by strangers who had never attended a parent-teacher meeting, never sat beside a hospital bed at Lara M, never calmed a child shaking from night terrors. Witnesses were called. A former co-worker described his exhaustion. A neighbor testified about seeing the child frequently alone with him, but also mentioned how tired he looked. The mother's lawyer framed concern as incompetence. Fatigue became neglect. Sacrifice became instability. Still, the father remained silent unless directly addressed. This silence was misinterpreted by some in the room. Silence can look like guilt in a courtroom. It can look like surrender. But for the father, silence was survival. He knew that reacting defensively would only confirm the narrative being built against him. Then the judge did something unexpected. Rather than continuing with procedural questions or addressing legal arguments, the judge leaned forward and asked the lawyers to pause. The room shifted. Judges rarely interrupt momentum unless something doesn't sit right, and something didn't. The judge looked directly at the father, not at the file, not at the lawyer, not at the evidence board, at him. The question was simple, not legal, not technical, not rehearsed. It was the kind of question no lawyer prepared you for, a question that didn't ask what he earned, but what he did, not what he claimed, but what he lived. The father took a moment before answering, not because he was calculating, but because the weight of the question surprised him. For the first time that day, someone wasn't asking him to defend himself. They were asking him to describe his reality. His answer didn't begin with hardship, it began with routine. He spoke about mornings, how his child wakes before the alarm, How breakfast is always the same because consistency matters. He described school drop-offs. The way his child checks over their shoulder to make sure he is watching until they walk inside. He talked about evenings filled with homework battles, dinner negotiations, and bedtime stories read even when his eyes burned from exhaustion. As he spoke, the courtroom changed. This wasn't a testimony designed to persuade. It was observation, lived detail, the kind of information that cannot be fabricated convincingly because it exists only in repetition. The judge didn't interrupt. Neither did the lawyers. The father then addressed the accusations not defensively, but honestly. He acknowledged his struggles. He admitted to exhaustion, to moments of fear, to times he doubted himself. But he framed them correctly not as failures, but as costs willingly paid. He explained that stability isn't the absence of struggle, it is the presence of commitment. The judge began asking follow-up questions, each one peeling away another layer of assumption. Questions about medical visits, teachers' names, bedtime routines, emotional changes in the child over time. The father answered calmly, specifically, without exaggeration. The mother's lawyer tried to regain control, objecting to relevance, but the judge overruled. Because relevance, in family court, isn't always financial. Sometimes it is relational. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It didn't involve new evidence or a shocking revelation. It was the gradual realization that the court had been looking at two different definitions of fitness, one defined by appearances, the other defined by presence. The judge recognized something courts are increasingly aware of but rarely acknowledge openly: caregiving is invisible labor, especially when performed by fathers. It often goes undocumented, undervalued, and misunderstood. When the ruling was delivered, it reflected that awareness. The decision didn't punish the mother. It didn't glorify the father. It simply preserved continuity for the child. Stability was redefined not as financial perfection, but as emotional reliability. The father was granted continued primary custody, with a structured plan for the mother to rebuild trust and presence over time. The ruling emphasized the child as existing attachment and the risk of disruption, not parental entitlement. As the courtroom emptied, there was no applause, no tears, just quiet. The father remained seated long after others left, not because he was stunned, but because the adrenaline finally drained. The fight he never wanted had ended not with victory, but with recognition. This case revealed a truth many parents learn too late: family court doesn't reward performance, it rewards consistency. It doesn't listen to who speaks the loudest, but to who shows up when no one is watching. And sometimes, one simple question is enough to reveal everything years of paperwork tried to hide. As people quietly left the courtroom, the father didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. He simply closed his eyes for a moment, knowing his child's life wouldn't be disrupted again, at least not today. This case reminds us that family court isn't always about winning. Sometimes, it is about being seen. One honest answer, given without performance or anger, can carry more weight than years of accusations. And for one child, silence in a courtroom became the loudest proof of love.